Good afternoon to you East Coasters. It's 12:01 p.m. Eastern Time. It is time for another episode of Remodelers on the Rise Live, the March 9th, 2021 version. Welcome. How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing well. Today, on today's show, we're going to do a little bit of a history lesson, if you will. A history lesson. A little bit of a history lesson on our industry, the remodeling industry, the residential remodeling industry, and in particular, a history lesson on how our businesses would have looked in the 70s and the 80s, how are the training and the knowledge that each one of you have at your fingertips now was a rare thing, and where some of these concepts of design build and proper markup and margin and lead carpenter, where did these ideas come from? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I don't have my chime out, and I don't really have a very formal structure to today's conversation, which sometimes that leads to trouble. Other times that leads to a great show. Hopefully it'll lead to a great show. Here's the rabbit hole that I went down last night. I have heard, and I'm going to start by probably butchering his name, but I have heard over the years a gentleman by the name of Walt Stoppelworth. Walt Stoppelworth. I've heard that name brought up in readings that I've done. Some of my clients who have brought up his name over the years. And for some, I don't know where it... oh, Terry Simpson, looking very handsome. Terry, likewise, first of all. And secondly, this is a brand new shirt. Bought it the other day at Target for some of you less fancy people. And when we bought it, my wife mentioned, now, I don't know if that's going to work with your background. That might clash if you wear that and you do your live show. So I don't know if it kind of clashes, I suppose. It's kind of a series of greens, but thank you, Terry. Appreciate the shout out. But last night, for some reason, I clicked on something and then I clicked on something else. And before you know it, I was reading the obituary of Walter Stoppelworth, who passed away back in 2013. And the more that I read, and then I went to Remodeling Magazine and I read some tributes on that, the more I realized, I've heard his name over time, but this dude made a huge impact on our industry. This gentleman was very generous with his time and his talents. He was a bit of on the cutting edge of really pushing our industry from, you can make a living, but don't have a lot of pride. You're just a carpenter. You're just running a construction business to, you can be an excellent carpenter building beautiful things and also an excellent businessman or businesswoman. And he had a little bit of his show of going to different locations and putting on events of how to make money in the remodeling industry, and did a lot of teaching. And I started reading the comments under his obituary, and I'm like, well, I know Tom Barber. That was one of my first remodeling clients, Tom and Wilma. They're awesome. I look and see Rob Bauer talking about the impact that Walt had on his life. I see Phil Bennett, client of mine and somebody that's in Remodelers community, who spoke very highly of Walt. There's several other people who commented yesterday. Chaden Halfhill, who had an impact. Michael Patterson, Jeff Forward, all commenting. Walt had a huge impact on our industry. And as I started to think about it more and more and understand kind of the time frame of things, JLC Live and Remodeling Magazine came out in 1985. Walt started doing his thing, it sounds like late 70s, early 80s. Linda Case, who founded Remodelers Advantage, and Victoria Downing, sounds like she joined Remodelers Advantage or started it. Apologize, don't know exact time frame on that. But once the 80s kind of hit and the start of the 90s, all of a sudden there was some literature, some magazines, some organizations, some roundtables that started to spring up, some different remodeling shows. But boy, before the mid 80s, if you were a remodeler and you wanted to improve your business, there wasn't a lot of resources out there. I think now we are so inundated and flooded with learning opportunities and clarity that we forget that, wow, we're spoiled compared to what it was before. I think about my grandpa who ran a building business back in the 50s, 60s. It was very limited if he wanted to become a stronger, more profitable business owner. So I started connecting the dots and realized, these ladies and gents who now are in their maybe mid to late 50s, maybe 60s, so I don't need to date anybody. That generation, there was a whole generation of remodelers who took our industry and went from, I make an okay living, to really being professional, profitable, organized business people. Remodelers Advantage had a huge impact, still continues to have a huge impact on that. Guys like Walt and Linda Case, Michael Stone. It was just very interesting as I started to, and it's very intriguing and interesting to me. Here I am making my living, making my career around being a coach consultant in the remodeling industry. And it was very interesting to really dig in and do some research and connect some of the pieces on, where things were and where they are today. And kind of just reading about Walt inspired me to continue to just provide value, provide content and education. So that's kind of what's on my mind today. I've got a bunch of comments here. Camouflage. Yes, the green is camouflage. Somebody's helping me out. Step Ulworth. Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I said I was going to butcher it, and I did, evidently. Kyle, I wish I could stay, but we have a book club meeting I need to attend. Great conversation. Wish I could be a part of it. Do you have a regular schedule of these events? You are rocking it, Kyle. So glad I decided to join in. Wow. That's Jeff Ford. Yes. And Jeff's helping me out with Steppenworth. So if you go to StreamYard.com/Facebook, Jeff, you can click a button so that I can see your pretty bald face and head. And I'm bald too. So we're tight like that. Remodeler show usually happens. Remodelers on the Rise show happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you guys can always go back and view it after the fact as well. So, it's just interesting to put yourself in a position. So we have this, this generation of remodelers who have really helped elevate our industry from what it was. I think that's interesting for us to think about. And in addition to that, what I started to kind of piece together as well, and I just went down a rabbit hole, spent hours last night just kind of clicking and looking. And I was reading an article that was talking about Walt doing a kind of a one-day conference, it sounded like, on the topic of how do you make money in the remodeling business. And getting up front, this is probably 85, 86, 87. I was just a young little tyke. I'm 38. So I was 3-4 years old then. And getting up in front of a group and saying, ladies and gents, you need to be at a 50% markup. And one of the articles I was reading was kind of like, they basically said, they're basically booing him. Like, that's not possible. That's a bunch of crap. And the article was saying, if they had fruits, they would have been throwing fruit at him. But here he is. He knows numbers. And he realized, hey, you can laugh at that all you want. You can say that that's not possible even. But how are you doing on making money? You're working your face off being a remodeler. How are you doing on actually making a profit for all of the hard, tremendous work you're putting in? Guess what? A 50% markup leads to a 33% gross profit. And if you're the typical remodeler maybe doing 5, 7, 9, $1.1 million of revenue, you're probably going to have 20-25% of overhead expenses. You better be charging 50% with a 33% margin if you want an 8% net profit at the end of the day. You know why you're not making a net profit? You know why you're basically doing all this work just for a glorified job and paycheck? It's because you're not charging what you need to charge. And it was very interesting to read about this and see, Phil Bennett, you might be still watching live, but you mentioned you said I first met Walt 30 years ago at a conference. Walt opened my eyes to what a professional should charge. He taught proper markup and made me proud to be in the business I am in. I can honestly say I went from being just another guy working out of his truck to a fledgling business owner almost overnight. Super cool, right? And I think it's helpful because what's also interesting is the same conversation that maybe Walt was standing in front of that room saying, you got to be at a 50% markup. And then let's talk about the details. Is still what a good number of our people in our industry still need to hear. We need to know our numbers. We need to understand that if you are, a $600,000, $800,000, $1.2 million business, and you're marking things up 1.30, it is going to be very hard for you to make a great living. You might be able to break even. You might be able to pay yourself a paycheck, but boy, there's not going to be a lot of ability to grow and invest in your business and hire a team around you. There's not going to be a lot of net profit at the end of the day. The numbers just don't work. They're numbers. It's facts. So it's interesting that we're still, and I guess maybe why I'm so excited about this, and just as I'm thinking about it, is again, I've never met Walt. I know some of the people that were impacted by him, but it kind of fired me up to maybe grab a little bit of the torch and continue pushing it forward and sharing this message of you got to know your numbers. Folks, we can be professional in this business. Let's know what we need to charge and how we charge. And then let's figure out how to sell and deliver the value and build up the value. Let's figure out how to attract the right clients and repel the wrong clients. It's all the stuff that I'm passionate about and that I love to talk about. So it's super interesting to kind of see that legacy. I'll pause there for a moment. Kevin, hello. Heather, hello. All right, rock and roll. Anybody else have any, if anybody's watching that's had experience with that, cool, share, or experience with Walt, awesome. I was going to reach out to Victoria and say, hey, this pieces that I'm seeing, what else am I missing? How else did this all go down? But I think it's very interesting to kind of piece it together. A couple other things that came to my mind that I wanted to share related to this is one thing that came to my mind is legacy. It was very interesting to see in the kind of final articles that that Remodeling Magazine wrote, to look at all of these comments from folks on the obituary of just, he made an impact on people. There's a legacy that he left behind, certainly on our industry as a whole, but also with individual people. I think that's something that all of us should spend a little time thinking about. What kind of legacy are we looking to build? Who am I investing my time and energy and love and effort into? Am I really making an impact on helping them improve and get better, or fill in the blank of whatever result we're after? I think that's an interesting thing to think about. Did Walt make you wonder what your obituary will read like? Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with this, Bailey, because that's quite a legacy, and it makes me wonder what my impact will be. Yeah. All of us are going to make an impact, right? In some form, some small, some big. But I think extra focus on that, thinking about that. There's a lot of books and there's a lot of training of like, write your obituary. What do you want it to say? Because if you wrote your obituary, chances are you're probably not going to start with, he was a very successful businessman that made an average of $342,000 of take-home salary per year. Compare that to others. Top 1%. Amazing. Is that what you kind of like really hang your hat on? Nah, I don't think for most of us, that's not really what we're kind of chasing after. It's work-life balance. It's the impact that we're making on our team. It's the people around us. It's our spouses. It's our kids. It's our relatives. It's our friends. Interesting to think about that. Cool. So that's a legacy thing that I wanted to share. Let me go back to my notes here. And if anybody has any little history or fill in some of the blanks of what I'm kind of piecing together of key things in our industry's history and past, I'd love to hear it. Go ahead and comment, or even after the facts, please do. But a bunch of the things that you're seeing, Jeff Ford commented on the post that I made last night, and he said this. Yes, did Walt make an impact, or does anybody have any Walt stories? After graduating with a degree in architecture and working for several years, I came across a Remodeling Magazine article that had a feature story on Walt and the design build model. It was a light bulb moment for me. I left my job 6 months later after I designed and signed my first project. Interesting. Rob Bauer commented, yeah, he just kind of went down memory lane again. So the design build model, certainly, Walt, I assume, was not the only person maybe touting that, but the design build model that's just so normal for us these days, the lead carpenter system, that's kind of just the be all end all, the idea that we need to be minimum 50% markup, and be really shooting for that 67% markup and 40% gross profit. Those types of concepts that are really best practices in our industry are rooted in this early training from Walt and Linda and Remodelers Advantage and Michael Stone. They came from somewhere. And before that time, there wasn't a lot that you could sink your teeth into. I think that's really interesting. And it's good for us to realize, okay, these best practices, that we kind of take for granted, we just got to keep focusing on them. These are the keys to building successful, profitable businesses. Let me go back, see if there's any other comments. Okay. The other thing that I kind of wanted to go off of on the second half of today's Remodelers on the Rise show, I figured I'd kind of share just what I've been thinking about and reading and researching in hopes that it kind of sparks some clarity for you guys and maybe even some memories for some of you more advanced in years folks who have, grew up on some of the people that I'm talking about. But the second part of this is, the title of one of, it sounded like his kind of traveling roadshow that Walt was doing was How to Make Money in the Remodeling Business. How to make money in the remodeling business. So if we rewound the clock and we went to a conference and spent a full day and the topic was how to make money in the remodeling business, what are the things that would be talked about in that meeting? What are the things that were true then and are still true now? What does it mean when all of these coaches, consultants, myself included, all of these remodelers who have really strengthened and run really strong, profitable remodeling businesses, why does everyone talk about know your numbers? You got to know your numbers. You got to know your numbers. If you've heard it once, you've heard it 1,000 times. I wanted to share just in the last 10, 12 minutes, what does that actually mean? What are the numbers that we're trying to understand? What are we actually trying to know when it comes to numbers? And I wanted to share some thoughts on that. Number one, what that means is you need to know how to read your profit and loss statement, your P&L statement. Your P&L is for this date range. Did you make money or lose money? And there's a lot of wrinkles to it. There's a lot of studying. There's a lot of things you need to understand. But you start by really understanding what that total sales at the top is, what your cost of goods sold is. Your P&L is total sales minus cost of goods sold. For so many of you, there's cost of goods sold related items that should be in the cost of goods sold section of your P&L that are down in overhead expenses. So knowing your numbers is understanding your P&L and fixing your P&L so that the chart of accounts, which are all of the lines that are making up your P&L, are correct and where they should be. Okay. So when you say know your numbers, you need to understand your P&L. Total sales minus cost of goods sold. The next thing on that P&L is your gross profit. Your gross profit is total sales minus all job-related expenses. Direct job-related expenses equals your gross profit. And when you divide your gross profit divided by your total sales, it gives you your gross profit percentage. And this, my friends, is where we get into the markup versus margin head scratching. Because that number, that gross profit margin number, is a margin number. And the majority of you are pricing your work with markup. The reason being is because it's a lot easier, clearer, simple to calculate based on markup. A conversation for another time. But we need to understand that 33% gross profit margin equals a 50% markup. We need to know our numbers. We need to know that if I have a 50% markup and I look at that gross profit over the year and that gross profit percentage is 30%, it's less than what it should be. I need to realize, I have some slippage there. What I was expecting to make in gross profit, I didn't make. I made less than what I was expecting to make. I had slippage. And it's not until we get into our job costing do we kind of see where that slippage is coming from. I quoted 20 hours for demo, took us 30. Slippage. More cost than what you were expecting. Okay. So back to the P&L. You got gross profit. Off of that are your overhead expenses, marketing, some of your insurances, rent, gas, truck, all these different things, professional fees, accounting, legal, etc. All of your overhead expenses. And then after that, you've got your net profit. And if you're going to know your numbers, you have to realize that oftentimes your net profit, off of that number comes your owner draws, If you're paying yourself a salary as maybe an S Corp, that's going to be showing up on your P&L. But if you take additional draws out of your business, that comes out of net profit. The principal amount you pay on that auto loan comes off of net profit. There's studying to do there. Know your numbers. Really understand your P&L, what each line item means, how it all works together, how your gross profit percentage matches up or not matches up with your markup. Got to dig into this. That's what I just explained there. I bet you if we rewind the clock 30, what's 1985? 36 years, I bet you Walt's talking about the same stuff I'm talking about here. Because these numbers, they don't change. It doesn't change. You got money coming in, you got money going out. And the money coming in, you marked up at a certain amount. Did you mark it up enough? Did you bring it in at the amount that you marked it up? Talking about in 1985, talked about it in 2005, talking about it in 2021. This is what we're going to be focused on and talking about in 2037 as well. Numbers. So that's one of the know your numbers. Okay. And then after you study your P&L, you've got to make some adjustments to your profit and loss statement to make sure that it's set up and organized properly. It's usually, as I work with remodelers on this, it's usually not a huge change or a huge shift, but there's little things that shouldn't be there, move that up. That shouldn't be there, move that up, and get this organized. You know, solidify each of your different line items. Okay. After that, what know your numbers means, and I bet you maybe at 10:30 a.m. at this little 1985 seminar, the next thing you probably went to is, what do you charge? How do you calculate your markup? How do you calculate your markup? Michael Stone has wonderful teaching on this. If you purchase the book for $45, Markup and Profit, and you go to page 38, I don't know if that's exactly the page, but you go to that, he'll show you exactly how to calculate your markup. There's a lot of other places where you can go to figure out how to calculate your markup. You need to know what your projected total sales are. You need to know what your overhead expenses are. You need to know what your net profit goal is. And then it's a simple division problem, and it spits out what your markup needs to be. Everybody's markup, as much as Walt and a lot of our industry leaders have talked about, you know, you got to be at 1.5. You know, a lot of people get to 1.67 for their markup. That's a little bit of a gold standard. Yes, that pushes people in the right direction. But at the same time, everybody's markup should, frankly, be different because it depends on your numbers, your overhead numbers, your net profit goals, your total sales. Okay. So that's another know your numbers. You've got to understand why you charge what you charge. That's not the first time you heard it from me. It's not going to be the last time. Another thing related to know your numbers, and I'll finish with this one. Actually, I'll do two more. One other thing is set up a business budget. Your overhead expenses down below, you should be able to be very clear with what each of those line items are going to be projected to be this upcoming year. You should be able to project your top line revenue goal. You should have a goal for your net profit. Set up your business budget. Realize, when I just put my business budget together at this level of sales, plugging in this percentage for cost of goods sold based on my markup, plugging in these overhead expenses and this net profit goal, crap, I'm only going to make $22,000 of net profit based on that. Which means you either need to cut expenses down, you need to increase your top line revenue, you need to bring your cost of goods sold percentage down so you have more gross profit dollars. You can make some adjustments on that, but until you've actually created your business budget, these numbers just float and you're not very clear. Sometimes you put that business budget together and go, if I sell it and produce it at that percentage of cost of goods sold and gross profit, and I do that top line sales, and my overhead expense are this, I'm going to have a net profit at the end of the day of $147,000 this year. Know your numbers. Run those numbers through. See what your business budget looks like. There's ways to do that, my friends. And then the other thing that I bet you in the afternoon after a little 1985 lunch, what were people having for lunch in 1985? I'm sure it was delicious. In the afternoon, I bet you we started talking about job costing. You are estimating your work, and your estimate, whatever you end up presenting to that client or that contract that they sign, there is an expected amount of gross profit dollars that you're expecting to make off of that job. If your markup is 1.50, if you look at your numbers and your estimate, there is a specific amount, an exact amount of gross profit dollars that you're expecting to make. And if you want to know your numbers, if you want to be like some of these guys that started commenting on my Walt post, if you want to be Phil Bennett, if you want to be Jeff Forward, if you want to be Rob Bauer, if you want to be Shaden Halfield, Michael Peterson, you've actually got to rein in and understand your job costing. You've got to, and the key there is, if you know what your expected is, you've got to have simple systems in place to know what your actual is, so that you can compare your estimated, what you're expecting to make in gross profit, to your actual. And then you're able to see, I'm way underbidding the demo phase. I'm way underbidding the trim package. I'm actually pretty good on this and that. And if you're actually looking at, and you get your team to actually do their time card so you can track it by the type of thing they're working on that specific project. If you have it dialed in for every expense related to that project goes into QuickBooks or Builder or CoConstruct so you can run a report. If you're hustling and working hard to bust through and get your job costing in place, and you review it during the job and certainly after the job, you will become such a stronger, more profitable, better remodeler. That is a huge example of knowing your numbers, your job costing, expected versus actual, and you're aiming to get it within 2% of what you were expecting. Knowing your numbers. I think it's super interesting, and I've just enjoyed kind of going down industry history, and it was really cool. Remodeling Magazine still has all these articles written, and then this link to this obituary, and I went to Home Tech's website, which is the company that Walt started back in the late 70s or early 80s, and it was super interesting that the foundational truth of how to run a successful remodeling business is just as true today as it was in 1992 and 1987 and 2003. Folks, these are tried and true things. You have to know your numbers. You have to understand why you charge what you charge in your markup. You have to do your job costing. You have to build value in your sales process. Yes, you also have to be marketers. We need to generate quality leads. But it should be reassuring, and it's super interesting to me. Again, I see this whole generation of guys and gals in their late 50s and 60s that have built tremendous remodeling businesses, and the reason they did is because they know their numbers, they embrace this training, this concept, this education, and they incorporated it into their business. It's not rocket science. It's hard. The remodeling business is a very hard business, but it's not impossible. Okay. That was good. That felt like a good show. That I heard of secondhand and reading, but I hope it was helpful. When did remodeling, quote unquote, begin as a true industry? As I was reading about it, there seemed to be a big section in the 70s, maybe, where a lot of the lumber yards and everybody was mostly focused on new construction. I don't know exactly the dates, and it wasn't until the 80s into the 90s that I think the suppliers and the lumber yards really started to see, there's a huge market here in the remodeling business. So I don't know exactly when that was, but it feels like the 80s was a big year for quote unquote remodeling to really get clear and to take off. Kevin said, I'm starting to understand my numbers. It's giving me more confidence in what I need to charge. Numbers don't lie. The facts of the numbers don't lie. Sometimes they're ugly and we don't want to see them, but the more we lean into them, the more we understand how all of this works, the more profitable we're going to be. The more that you can understand and explain to me, hey, I was expecting to make $12,250 of gross profit on this project, gross profit being total sales minus all of my cost of goods sold, and I ended up making $11,000. I had slippage of $1,250 on this project. I don't know if I did the math right, but I think that was the numbers I used. What happened? And when you're organized enough to be able to explain what happened and you start watching the small things, all of that loops back in with the bigger picture of your overall P&L. We can do this. You can do this, guys. There's so many people who have tackled this and really embraced the numbers, understand the numbers. And Kevin, you're definitely on your way. You're making huge strides, my man. All right. That was today's Remodelers on the Rise show. I hope you had fun. I had fun. Keep focusing on these fundamentals, blocking and tackling, knowing your numbers. Hopefully, and me unpacking it gave you guys some some ideas and some perspective. Thank you, Rob and Michaela, for throwing a like at this. And we will talk to you guys again on Thursday for the next episode of Remodelers on the Rise.